Hey you guys, welcome back to the channel. It's Liv. As we left off in my last video, during the Reconstruction era, Black Americans was thriving under laws that actually protected them. Federal Union troops were stationed throughout the South to make sure the Confederate Democrats obeyed the law. If you haven't watched that video yet, I'll leave a link up top for you. During this time, Americans were united under the same legal protection. Black Americans were on equal grounds when it comes to law enforcement and safety. And as history shows, Black Americans were never a people dependent on man. Their dependence was on God. They never carried a spirit of laziness. Those narratives were lies created to undermine our dignity and progress. These individuals mastered psychological manipulation long before modern politics. If you haven't realized that yet, trust me, when you truly turn back to God, He will reveal the cowardly spirit behind their actions. They held no authentic gifts or skills rooted in truth. Instead, they relied on deception and mind games. So much of what they built was artificial, manufactured to maintain power. Now that we understand the motive behind why the Confederate Democrats would betray both their nation and the American people, let's talk about how I believe that plot was put into action. That brings us to the Compromise of 1877. To understand how we got here, we need to break down the order of the presidency because it matters. Here is the presidential order. We'll start at Abraham Lincoln. He was a Republican in 1861 through 1865. He was assassinated in April of 1865. Andrew Johnson, a Democrat, 1865 through 1869, was Lincoln's vice president that took over after the assassination. He ran with Lincoln in 1864 on a temporary National Union ticket, but he was a Southern Democrat at his core. Before we go any further, let me quickly explain this National Union ticket and what it was really temporarily used for. Mind you, Andrew Johnson was a Democrat to his core. I personally view him more as a political plant, and this is a major reason Reconstruction became so messy once he took over. The National Union ticket was nothing more than a temporary rebranding used only for President Abraham Lincoln's 1864 reelection during the Civil War. It was a strategic move, not a new party. Now, Andrew Johnson was a Southern Democrat from Tennessee, the only Southern senator who appeared to stay loyal to the Union during session. Lincoln chose him for one reason: symbolism. It was meant to send a message. Even some Southern Democrats are standing with the Union. So Johnson was placed on the ticket to make a statement, not because he shared Republican values. And the moment Lincoln was assassinated and Johnson became president, he reverted right back to his true Democratic beliefs, and the entire direction of Reconstruction shifted with him. He vetoed civil rights bills. He opposed Black citizenship. He wanted to restore Southern power. He almost destroyed Reconstruction before it even began. After Lincoln's assassination, Congress constantly battled Andrew Johnson. They had to override many of his vetoes, and eventually they impeached him, formally charging him with obstruction Reconstruction. He ultimately finished his term only because the Senate fell one vote short of removing him. Even so, Congress pushed key construction laws through despite his opposition. This brings us to Ulysses S. Grant, a Republican who served 2 terms during Reconstruction. His vice presidents were Schuyler Colfax for his first term and Henry Wilson for his second term. And trust me, Republicans had learned their lesson after allowing Democrat Andrew Johnson to run with Abraham Lincoln. Let's just say the National Union ticket, that temporary rebranding used to symbolize Union unity, was the first and last time it was ever used in Americans' history. Under Grant's leadership, Reconstruction was strengthened and protected in a way Johnson never intended. And this shift set the stage for everything that followed. Now, number 4, Rutherford B. Hayes. He was a Republican during 1877 and 1881. He entered the office because of the Compromise of 1877. He generally respected traditional Republican values of the time, including supporting civil service reform, supporting some protection for Black Americans. He also promoted national unity after the divisive 1876 election. His vice president was William A. Wheeler, who was also a Republican. Let's discuss how Hayes was elected president. Have you heard of the phrase, the devil stays busy? It's actually God's teaching that reminds believers to stay alert and not become distracted because the enemy is always busy. If we're not grounded in prayer and focus, we leave room for the enemy to operate. I say that because this teaching immediately comes to mind when I explain this part of our history. I truly believe the Confederate Democrats saw an opening, a chance to create confusion and chaos during the election process. Now let's go back. The dispute election of 1876. The presidential race between Rutherford B. Hayes, Republican, and Samuel J. Tilden, Democrat, became one of the most contested elections in U.S. history because four states sent in conflicting results. The states in question were Florida, Louisiana, South Carolina, and one elector in Oregon. These states submitted two different sets of electoral votes, one set declaring Tilden the winner, another set declaring Hayes the winner. This created a constitutional crisis because nobody knew which set was legitimate. Keep in mind, this was during Reconstruction. Republicans had already held the presidency for 2 terms under Grant. Southern Democrats were determined not to let another Republican win. They also didn't get the results they wanted with Andrew Johnson. Federal troops were still in the South. Black Americans were still serving as mayors, congressmen, and community leaders. They were successfully organizing and thriving despite resistance. The Reconstruction amendments were being enforced, and Southern Democrats hated that. Many people overlooked that the Confederate Democrat could have built businesses, collaborated with other Americans, paid fair wages, and participated in society like everyone else. They had the same opportunities, but they didn't want equality or cooperation. These are not good people. They're driven by greed and a desire for control. They commit some of the worst acts imaginable against humanity just to feel superior and powerful. This behavior is not normal or human, and it's sick for anyone to pretend that it is. That type of spirit is honestly demonic. By the 1876 presidential election, tensions boiled over into a widespread violence and voter suppression. Black Republican voters faced intimidation at the polls, ballot stuffing, threats, and mob style interference. Democrats claim Republicans stole votes by counting Black American ballots, while Republicans charged Democrats with blocking Black American votes. With neither side trusting the results, when the dispute reached the returning board, largely led and controlled by Republicans, back then, this is the board responsible for certifying election results. They chose to invalidate many Black American votes cast for Democrats. They threw out thousands of ballots, claiming evidence of Democrats' ballot stuffing, coercion, and voter intimidation. The Democrats accused them of cheating for throwing out their votes. With rising tensions, conflicting vote counts, and the approach of the inauguration, many feared the country was on the brink of another civil war. And as I've pointed out before, even during the Civil War, not every Republican who fought against slavery believed in full equality for Black Americans. Some simply wanted to end the conflict and eventually reunite with their white counterparts in the South. Others were concerned about the Panic of 1873. The Panic of 1873 actually began in Europe and then spread it to the United States. In another video, I'll break down how this moment also ties to Britain, the collapse of the Freedmen's Bank, and the early legal groundwork that later connects to the Wong Kim Ark case. There are many layers and nuances, but this overlapping chaos is one of the major factors unfolding during the election dispute. In 1873, the economy began to collapse because Northern bankers, railroad companies, and big businesses had been gambling with the nation's money. taking out risky loans, and failing to pay them back. These were white-owned institutions making bad investments and creating a financial crisis that had nothing to do with Black American citizens who were simply working, building, and pulling their own weight. When the panic hit and those irresponsible decisions came into light, it happened simultaneously with the disputed presidential election, creating a perfect storm where politics and big businesses worked together to protect themselves. That mindset carried into the political negotiation of 1876. Republican leaders were feeling pressure on multiple fronts: pressure to hide years of reckless government spending, pressure to cover up the loss of Black Americans' wealth in the Freedmen's Bank collapse, pressure from Northern business interests who wanted stability, and pressure to reunite with Southern Democrats to regain political power. All of this happened while Black Americans had just had their savings stolen by white bank managers and connected businessmen who used Black people's savings to cover risky loans and investments. Let's be clear, Black families weren't irresponsible. Their wealth was stolen from them. The protection of these financial and political interests became a major factor behind the final decision, even at the expense of Black Americans' rights and wealth. All of this led directly to the Compromise of 1877. It was a backroom political deal created to resolve the disputed 1876 presidential election and regain political power to protect their interests. Under this agreement, Southern Democrats allowed the Republican candidate, Rutherford B. Hayes, to become president, but only under one condition: the federal troops had to be removed from the South. And I believe this is when the Republican began to turn a blind eye to the corrupt system the Democrats created and the Republicans benefited from it. That same corrupt system is still running right now in America. This is why so many historians and scholars call this deal the Great Betrayal of 1877. I know everything I'm breaking down may sound like a simple black versus white issue, but it wasn't. Reconstruction shows us that there were white Republican officials who genuinely enforced the law and believed in moral standards for all Americans. But the Democratic Party in the South never wanted true unity. They wanted their own separate system of power, their own government, their own rules, and they fought to keep it. When the deal of 1877 was made, it wasn't just Black Americans who were betrayed. Let's be clear, these were politicians under pressure from powerful business owners, what we call the elites today. And those elites didn't just abandon Black Americans, they also abandoned the white Americans who never agreed to the deal and didn't vote for any of those policies. This was about political power and money. It was about covering up financial crisis, protecting Northern business interests, and preserving the influence of the elite at the expense of everyone else. And because of that, many Black Americans lost trust in the Republican Party, and many Republicans were blindsided by decisions that they didn't even know were being made behind closed doors. Their own supporters were thrown under the bus. But here's the deeper truth: the elites never wanted Black and white working class Americans to unite, because together they form the backbone of America's economy, and a united working class would have threatened the power structure that the elites depended on. That division was intentional then and is still intentional now. And this is exactly where the next part of the story begins, because once the federal troops were pulled out of the South, the door was left wide open for the corruption, violence, and suppression that followed. And that chain of events leads us directly to cases like Wong Kim Ark and how our birthright citizenship laws were ultimately hijacked. Thank you all for watching. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and I'll see you in my next video.